In a world where loyalty is fragile and appearances deceive, this story reveals how quickly people change when circumstances shift. Betrayal exposes true intentions, and when the truth finally surfaces, nothing stays hidden. As she steps into a new reality of power and control, those who once walked away are forced to face the consequences. Because in the end, reality always wins, and karma never forgets.
Preston Carter strode into New York City's most lavish Diamond Gala with his 26-year-old girlfriend clinging to his arm. A smug smile was plastered on his face, the kind that seems to steal all the oxygen from a room. Just miles away, in their sprawling mansion, he had left his pregnant wife behind with a single, cruel remark. He told her she looked as big as a whale, then ordered her to go dust the library and not to bother waiting up for him. He had no inkling that the $5,000 ticket he was holding was not a stroke of luck. It was the bait for a perfectly laid trap. He was blissfully unaware that every dollar in his bank, every business deal he celebrated, and every expensive suit in his closet existed because of one woman. That woman was the one he had just insulted, who was at this very moment crying over a cold holiday meal meant for two. She was the woman whose pregnancy he refused to even look at. She was the woman he had skillfully convinced was completely worthless. But here was the secret Preston never imagined. His quiet, overlooked, and supposedly broken wife owned the very hotel he was now standing in. She also owned the bank that held his mortgage. In fact, she owned his entire company through 12 different secret corporations. And tonight, in front of 500 of America's most powerful people, she was about to emerge from the shadows. She would be wearing a $12 million sapphire necklace, and she was poised to set his entire world on fire. But this story is about so much more than a simple act of revenge. The real battle started after the party ended. The public turned on her. His lawyer tried to use her own unborn child as a weapon against her, and then at 3 a.m, Preston himself appeared on her doorstep. This tale will make you challenge everything you believe about silence, power, and the will to survive. It is proof that the most powerful woman in the room is not always the loudest one. She is often the one who has been silent for 5 years and has finally decided she is done playing a part. Before we continue, I want to be crystal clear about what this story is truly about. It is not about money, and it is not about getting even. It is about a woman who was told for 5 long years that she was nothing. She slowly began to believe it until one day she decided to stop. If you have ever been in a relationship that made you feel small, or if you were ever too scared to leave because you thought you had nowhere else to turn, then this story is for you. Your silence is not a sign of weakness. Your patience is not a flaw in your character. And your comeback story does not need $1 billion. It only needs you to make a single choice. Preston Carter entered the Diamond Gala. He had a woman who was not his wife on his arm, and a look on his face that shone brighter than the huge chandelier overhead. He adjusted the lapels on his custom-made tuxedo, a suit that cost more than what most people pay in rent for a full year. He leaned close and whispered to the blonde woman next to him, "This is the big leagues, babe. Just stay close to me and try to act like you belong." Tiffany Blake, who was 26 years old, was poured into a knockoff red designer gown. It was so tight it looked as if it had been spray painted onto her. She let out a little squeal of excitement that startled 3 wealthy women standing nearby. "Oh my goodness, Preston, is that the mayor?" On this particular night, Preston Carter felt absolutely invincible. He was convinced he had clawed his way up from nothing to the very top of his field. He was certain it was all due to his own genius and hard work. He believed the invitation in his hand was the world's final acknowledgement of his greatness. He was wrong about every single thing. That invitation was not a prize, it was a collar. And the woman he left at home, 7 months pregnant, and crying over a holiday meal he had chosen to miss, she was not the weak person he thought she was. She was not the simple wife he had spent 5 years carefully molding her to be. The reality was she owned the very hotel where he now stood. She owned the bank that financed the loan on his house. She owned every last cent of his investment firm, hidden away under a complicated web of shell companies. The whole arrangement was so brilliantly complex that it would take a team of elite accountants 3 months to figure out, and she already had that team working for her. But before we get to the end, you need to understand his real crime. Because what Preston Carter did to his pregnant wife was far worse than just cheating. It was more than just cruelty. It was a slow, quiet war that he waged against a woman whose only fault was wanting to be loved for herself. And that woman, her name was Vivian. And on this night, she was finally finished with pretending. To understand how Vivian Sinclair ended up scrubbing pots in a giant Connecticut mansion while secretly managing a global empire from a hidden phone in her laundry room, we have to go back 6 years. We have to go to a small diner in Dayton, Ohio. A 28-year-old woman was sitting alone in a booth with cracked vinyl seats, wearing her late father's flannel shirt. She was just staring into a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Her father, Henry Sinclair, had been buried the day before. To the rest of Dayton, Henry was just a mechanic, but he was a brilliant one. He was the kind of man who could diagnose a car's problem just by the sound of its engine. He would never charge a widow the full price for a repair. He always had a little grease under his nails and a laugh that could fill up a room. He had raised Vivian on his own after her mother passed away when Vivian was only 12. What the town of Dayton did not know was that Henry Sinclair had also invented a revolutionary fuel component back in the late 1970s. It completely changed how automobile engines functioned. He patented it quietly and licensed it to dozens of manufacturers. By the time he died of a heart attack at 61, that tiny device was inside nearly 60% of every engine on the planet. Henry left Vivian an incredible fortune. It was $4.3 billion, handled by a company called the Aurora Group. It was managed by a man named Benedict Ashford, the chief executive officer of the most exclusive private bank in London. As Vivian sat in that diner the day after the funeral, her phone buzzed. It was her former fiancé's lawyer. This was the man who had taken $2 million from her personal account before fleeing to Costa Rica 6 months earlier. He vanished right after he discovered the true extent of her wealth. The lawyer's voice was smooth and rehearsed. "Miss Sinclair," he said, "my client believes it is in everyone's best interest to avoid a messy legal battle. He proposes we settle this matter privately." Vivian just hung up the phone. She did not say a word. She looked at her reflection in the diner's dark window. Rain streamed down the glass, making her face blurry until she looked like a stranger. She saw a woman who had been betrayed by the first man she had ever truly loved. Her father was gone, her mother was a distant memory, and her money had become a heavy weight. It made every new relationship feel like a business deal. She picked up her phone and dialed Benedict Ashford. "Benedict," she said, her voice perfectly steady, even with tear stains still drying on her face. "I want to disappear. I need a new identity. I will manage everything remotely from now on. As of today, Vivian Sinclair no longer exists." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "And who, madam," Benedict finally asked, "shall be taking her place?" "No one," she replied. "Just an ordinary woman." She wanted to find a man who could love her without knowing about the fortune attached to her name. So that evening she called her grandmother. Gloria Sinclair was 72 years old, with a mind as sharp as a tack and a tongue that was twice as sharp. She still resided in the same house in Dayton where she had raised Vivian's father, Henry. Gloria was the only other person on earth who knew the full details of what Vivian was planning. "Grandma," Vivian began, "I am going to find someone who loves me for me when I have nothing to offer. I am going to live like a normal person for a while and find out if real love exists." Gloria was quiet for several moments. Then she spoke the words that Vivian would carry with her for the next 6 years, feeling them in her pocket like a smooth, heavy stone. "Sweetheart," she said, "if you really want to know a man's true character, do not watch how he treats you at your best. Watch how he treats you at your worst. That is the only test that ever matters." So Vivian packed a few bags and moved to Westport, Connecticut. She rented a small apartment right above a bakery. She took a job as a waitress in a diner she secretly owned through 3 different companies. She filled her closet with jeans from the sale rack and drove an old Honda Civic that had a large, noticeable dent in its rear bumper. This is how Vivian first met Preston, and to her he was like a force of nature. He was easily the most charming man she had ever encountered in her life. He had this incredible ability to make you feel like you were the only person on the planet When his eyes were on you, the rest of the world just seemed to fade away. Every single word that came out of Vivian's mouth seemed to hold him completely captivated. He was the perfect gentleman in every sense of the word. He always opened doors for her at restaurants. He would make sure to pull her chair out before she took a seat. He even remembered that she liked her coffee with oat milk and just one sugar. A fresh cup would be waiting for her every time they met at their favorite little coffee shop. On their third date, as they strolled past a market, an elderly woman in front of them dropped all of her shopping. Two big paper bags burst open and her groceries went tumbling across the sidewalk. Cans rolled out into the street, and the woman looked like she was on the verge of tears. Preston didn't even think for a moment. He ran over to help her and gathered up every last item. He then carried both of the woman's heavy bags all the way to her car. She tried to give him a $5 bill for his trouble, but he just smiled and politely shook his head no. He came back to Vivian with that warm smile. "Sorry about that," he said. "I just could not stand by and watch her struggle." In that exact moment, Vivian felt herself falling hopelessly in love. It was not just his actions, but how natural his kindness seemed. It felt like it was woven into the very fabric of who he was. She would replay that moment in her mind again and again over the course of the next 5 years. She would try to understand how that same wonderful man could turn into someone who would call his own pregnant wife a whale. They got married 18 months after that first date. Vivian had let Preston think that she had a small inheritance from her father, just enough to make a down payment on a house. The real story was that she bought the entire house with cash using one of her shell companies. She then had a fake mortgage created so Preston would believe he was paying for their home with money from his own company, Carter Ventures. That company meant everything to him. It was his proof to the world that he was a powerful and significant man. Preston never knew the real story. Every single client, every investor, and every major contract his company secured was all secretly directed to him by her own massive corporation, the Aurora Group. It was all done through a complex web of businesses with names like Nebula Holdings and Orion Acquisitions. Vivian was his one and only investor. She was his one and only client. She was the hidden source of every single dollar he had ever earned. She did not do any of this to control him. She did it all because she loved him. She wanted him to feel like a success. She wanted the man she married to feel like he was on top of the world. She simply never dreamed that he would one day use that world to try and crush her. A person does not just wake up one day as a monster. It is a slow and quiet transformation. Abuse is not usually one single huge event that shatters your life. It is more like a steady drip of water that slowly carves a canyon out of solid rock. It happens so slowly that you do not even see the landscape changing until one day you realize you cannot remember what it looked like before. The first year of their marriage was an absolute fairy tale. Preston brought her a beautiful bouquet of flowers every Friday, without ever missing one. He cooked her dinner every Sunday evening. He used to call her my girl, and her heart would just melt every time she heard those words. In the beginning, that incredible feeling was the only thing that mattered. He would wrap his arms around her from behind as she washed the dishes, kiss the back of her neck, and whisper, "How did I ever get so lucky?" In their second year, the very first tiny crack appeared in their perfect life. They were preparing for a dinner party, and Vivian came downstairs wearing a brand new blue dress. Preston just looked at her for a long, quiet moment. A cold expression came over his face. He said, "Are you seriously going to wear that? It is kind of boring, don't you think? You should wear something with a little more style. You have been looking a bit soft lately." She went back upstairs and put on a different dress. She told herself it did not mean anything. After all, people in a relationship are supposed to be honest with one another. It is just a normal part of being together. Sometimes it can even be a positive thing. But by their third year of marriage, his opinions were the only ones that mattered. He stopped saying please. He never said thank you. The Friday flowers and the Sunday dinners were just a distant, forgotten memory. He started calling their house my house and their car my car, even though it was Vivian's money that had purchased it all. He would say things like, "You bring nothing of value to this relationship, Vivian. You have a part-time job as a waitress, and you do nothing around here. I am the one building our future. I am the one with the vision. You should just feel lucky that I let you live here." By their 4th year, his cruelty had become a routine part of her everyday existence. It was just who he was now. He would get home late at night smelling of expensive perfume that did not belong to her. If she dared to ask where he had been, he would give her a look of pure disgust that made her feel impossibly small. "I was working, Vivian. I was closing deals that you could never possibly understand because you have never done anything important. Now go fix me something to eat. I am starving." She was fully aware that she could leave. She could go into the laundry room at any moment, take out the hidden, encrypted phone from the bottom of the hamper, and make a single call to her assistant, Benedict. Preston would just vanish from her life. He would be removed with the precise and quiet efficiency of a surgeon removing a tumor. Vivian had the money, she had the lawyers, and she held all of the power, but she also held on to hope. And hope can be a very foolish, stubborn, and destructive force. She kept waiting for the man she had originally fallen in love with to return. The man who had helped an old woman with her groceries, the man who used to call her my girl. She kept giving him just one more chance, and then another one, and then one more after that. There is a secret about these kinds of relationships that no one ever shares. The person who chooses to stay is not weak. It actually requires an incredible amount of strength to stay. It is just a strength that is used in the wrong way. A power that you turn against yourself, slowly crushing your own spirit from the inside out. The most courageous thing Vivian Sinclair ever did was not building a billion-dollar empire from the ground up. It was waking up each morning next to a man who made her feel completely worthless and still managing to find the strength to get out of bed. In their 5th year, he hired Tiffany Blake. Tiffany was 26 years old, blonde, and desperate for success. She had a communications degree from a state university and a special gift for telling powerful men exactly what they wanted to hear. Preston made her his new executive assistant. She began her new position at Carter Ventures. In just 3 months, she was already managing his personal phone calls, taking his expensive suits to the dry cleaner, and meeting him at a 5-star hotel every single Tuesday afternoon. He told Vivian he was in board meetings. Vivian, of course, was aware of everything. She had access to every financial statement, every single credit card bill, and every location update from his car's GPS. She saw the charges from the hotel on the company credit card. She saw the receipts from high-end jewelry stores. She watched as a $12,500 diamond necklace from Cartier was recorded in the company's accounting books as computer hardware. She saw every single detail as her heart broke in slow motion. It shattered so slowly and so completely that when there was absolutely nothing left to feel, she barely even registered that the love was gone. Then, 3 months into his affair, Vivian discovered she was pregnant. She made the decision to tell Preston that night at dinner. She prepared his favorite meal. She set the table with candles, and she placed the ultrasound picture inside a small envelope right next to his dinner plate. Preston opened it. He stared at the image for a very long time, and then he slowly looked up at her. For a fleeting, painful moment, she thought she recognized the man she married in his eyes. "A baby," he stated, his voice unusually low. "A girl," Vivian whispered, a tiny bit of hope making her heart ache. "We are going to have a daughter." Preston set the photograph down on the table. He then lifted his fork, sliced into his steak, and spoke without even a glance in her direction. "Well, I hope she has your looks. My genetics would be wasted on someone who will just become a housewife anyway." As soon as he finished his meal, he went upstairs. He did not mention the baby again for 3 entire weeks, but Vivian remained at the dining table long after the candles had melted into pools of wax. She rested a protective hand on her stomach and made a decision that would alter everything. She was no longer staying for Preston. She was no longer hoping he might change. She was done with hope. It was time to create a plan. She retrieved the hidden phone and called Benedict. "The gala," she said, her voice firm as stone. "What is the date for the Diamond Gala this year?" "December 14th, madam. The invitations were mailed last week." "Send an invitation to Preston," she ordered, "and ensure it appears to come from the official organizers. I want a VIP table reserved for him right near the front." Benedict paused for a moment on the other end of the line. "Heiress. And what about the board presentation, madam?" "Move the meeting to tonight," Vivian directed. "I want the full financial investigation completed and prepared for presentation. See to it that Henderson and the entire legal department are there." Benedict paused, selecting his words with care. "Ma'am, are you completely certain you wish to handle it this way?" Vivian's eyes drifted to the ultrasound photo. It lay on the table next to Preston's untouched dinner and the cold, solidified candle wax. "I am completely certain," she answered with conviction. "My daughter will not begin her life inside a house built on secrets." The weeks leading up to the gala should have been a happy beginning to a new part of her life. Instead, they turned into the most difficult time Vivian had ever experienced. Everything fell apart on Thanksgiving. Vivian, 6 months pregnant, was up at 5 in the morning. She spent the entire day cooking a huge holiday feast. She roasted a golden brown turkey with a savory sage stuffing, made cranberry sauce from scratch, and baked a rich green bean casserole. She even prepared a sweet potato pie using the treasured recipe from Preston's own mother. He had told her about it on their second date, mentioning it was the one thing that tasted like home. She set the dining table with their finest china, lit the long candles, and changed into her favorite maternity dress. It was a soft green dress that made her feel attractive for the first time in a very long time, despite the burden of the baby and of 5 long years of being ignored. She had also poured his favorite bourbon over a single, large ice ball in a crystal glass, just the way he preferred it. Preston did not arrive home until 9:15 that night. By then, the turkey was cold, the candles had sputtered out, and the ice in his bourbon was completely melted. He walked into the dining room, looked at the incredible meal she had prepared, and then his face twisted in annoyance. "I already ate dinner," he stated bluntly. "The guys took me to Nobu. You know I cannot eat this kind of heavy food, Vivian. It is so plain." Vivian's hands began to tremble, but she managed to keep her voice steady. "I made the sweet potato pie from your mother's recipe. You told me it was your favorite." Preston yanked his tie loose with a sharp tug. "That was a very long time ago, before I learned what actual good food tastes like. Just get rid of all of this. And open a window. It smells like a greasy spoon in here." He turned and walked upstairs, without a single glance at her pregnant stomach, without one question about their child, and without even saying Happy Thanksgiving. Vivian dropped into a chair at the beautifully arranged empty table. She picked up her fork and ate the holiday meal by herself, as salty tears dripped onto the slice of pie she had spent 3 hours perfecting just for him. Later that night, she could not bear the thought of being in the same bed with him. So Vivian set up a makeshift bed on the living room sofa and called her best friend Ruth Washington. They had been friends since their freshman year of college. Ruth was a pediatric nurse in Bridgeport and was known for being brutally honest. "Viv, you have to leave that house immediately," Ruth insisted. "Pack a bag and drive over to my place. I will have the guest room ready for you." "I am 7 months pregnant, Ruth. It is not that simple." "You have $1 billion to your name, Vivian. You can do absolutely anything you want." "This was never about the money," she replied in a quiet tone. "I just wanted it to be real. I needed to believe he could love me for myself. If I reveal the truth to him now, I will never know the answer." "The answer to what?" Ruth's voice was full of frustration. "He makes you feel worthless. That is the only answer you need. This little experiment of yours is over, Viv. He failed. You need to listen to me. When someone shows you who they truly are, believe them. You have given him 5 years of second chances. This is not love, honey. You are his prisoner." Vivian squeezed her eyes shut. "Not for much longer. The big gala is in 2 weeks. I have something in motion. It will all be finished after the gala. I promise you," Vivian whispered. On the other end of the phone, Ruth stayed quiet for a few long seconds. When she finally did speak, her voice was quiet and extremely serious. "Vivian Sinclair, I am giving you my word. If he ever puts a hand on you or that baby, I will personally bring down everything he has ever created, and I will not need $1 billion to get it done." A week before the gala, Vivian went for her last checkup before her due date. It was to be her final ultrasound. This baby had been conceived during a moment Vivian had held on to, wishing it had meant something. She had asked Preston to come with her. "I have a meeting," he had replied, his attention fixed on his phone. "A very important one, with people who actually matter." So Vivian went by herself. The doctor, a kind woman named Dr. Patterson, performed the ultrasound. The baby was perfectly healthy. Her heartbeat was regular and strong, and she was in the ideal position for birth. The image on the screen was a picture of health, which made the disaster of her own life feel even more pronounced. After a moment, Dr. Patterson's warm smile faded slightly. "Mrs. Carter, your blood pressure is a little high. Have you been experiencing any unusual stress?" At that very moment, something inside of Vivian finally broke. It was not a loud shatter, but a quiet, slow crack, like a tiny fissure spreading across solid rock. The tears started to fall, and once they began, she was powerless to stop them. They just silently streamed down her cheeks. She sat on the exam table in a thin paper gown, with cold gel still on her skin, and she just let the tears flow. Dr. Patterson simply held her hand, waiting quietly for the sobs to stop. When she finally grew quiet, the doctor asked in a soft voice, "Vivian, I need to ask you a very serious question, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you safe at home?" Vivian opened her mouth, ready to let the whole truth pour out. The story was right there on the tip of her tongue, fighting to get out. But after 5 years of pretending everything was fine, silence was a habit she just could not break. "I am okay," she lied. "It is just my hormones going crazy." She put on her clothes, walked out of the office, and started across the rainy parking lot to her old, rusty Honda Civic. That was when she saw it. Preston's shiny silver Mercedes was parked on the other side of the road, directly in front of the Cheesecake Factory. She could see him clearly through the big glass windows, sitting inside the restaurant's warm, welcoming light. He was in a booth with Tiffany Blake. Tiffany leaned her head back, laughing at something he said. Then, Preston reached across the table and gently fed her a bite of cheesecake from his own fork. After that, his hand moved down and came to rest on Tiffany's stomach. He started rubbing it with a soft, loving touch. The kind of touch a man gives the woman who is carrying his child. Tiffany was pregnant too. Vivian stood frozen in the pouring rain, 7 months pregnant, and all alone watching her husband gently touch another woman's belly. It was happening in the same restaurant where he had proposed to her 3 years ago. He had knelt on one knee right there, near the dessert display and the hostess stand, and promised that she was the only woman he could ever see himself with. During her entire 7 months of pregnancy, he had not touched Vivian's stomach even one time. She had pleaded with him to feel their baby kick, but he always pushed her away, saying he had more important things to worry about. Her mother's words from a phone call last week echoed in her mind. "You are going to burn his entire kingdom to the ground. Then you will pack your bags and come home to me. We will raise my granddaughter with so much love and happiness that she will never know a single day of sadness. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Mama," Vivian had whispered back. "And sweetheart," her mother had added, "wear the blue dress, the one covered in diamonds. Make sure that man sees exactly what he is about to lose." The night before the gala, Preston came home around midnight, reeking of booze. Vivian was in bed, propped up on a pile of pillows to help her breathe easier. She was looking through a book of baby names and had just drawn a circle around the name Eleanor. Preston stopped in the doorway and just stared at her. The look of pure disgust on his face was so strong that Vivian flinched back, as if he had hit her. "My God, Vivian, you are huge," he slurred. "Just looking at you makes me sick." "I am carrying your child, Preston." "Are you sure about that?" he sneered back. "Let us be real with each other, Vivian. I have not been near you in months. How can I be sure what you do all day long while I am at work?" The words were so incredibly cruel, crafted to cause the most amount of damage, and they took her breath away. The same man who spent every Tuesday afternoon with his other woman was now accusing his pregnant, faithful wife of cheating. He sat down on the bed to pull off his shoes and then said the words she had been dreading for months. "After the baby is born, we have to have a real discussion about our future. I have been thinking a lot. I want a different kind of life." The company is heading in a new direction, and I think it is time for my personal life to do the same. He was laying out his entire plan for her. He was going to throw her away the second their baby was born, right after she had served her purpose. "But where would I go, Preston?" Vivian asked, making her voice sound small and weak. "I have nothing. You control all of our finances." Preston smiled, and his perfect white teeth shined in the dark room. "That is right. So maybe you should try being a little more thankful." 4 minutes later, he was fast asleep. Vivian stayed awake until the sun started to rise, with her hand on her stomach, feeling her daughter kicking softly against her skin. She whispered into the quiet room, "Tomorrow, my sweet girl. Tomorrow, Mommy is done pretending." At 2:54 in the morning, 3 different disasters hit Vivian's life all at the same time. The first was a phone call that woke her from a deep sleep. It was Benedict, her most trusted advisor. And his voice was full of stress. He said, "Madam, we have a major problem." He explained that someone on the board had leaked a huge secret to the press. A newspaper now knew that the true owner of the Aurora Group would be announced at the gala tonight. If that news got out before the event, her husband Preston would definitely panic and try to run or destroy documents. The second disaster came from her best friend Ruth. She called and said, "Viv, you are not going to believe this. Tiffany Blake is at a hair salon telling anyone who will listen that Preston is divorcing you on Monday. His lawyer says you will walk away with nothing because you are just a housewife with no job." The third call was from her own lawyer. He said, "Mrs. Carter, someone took out a loan against your house yesterday for $500,000. The signature on the paperwork was her name, but an expert already confirmed it was a fake." Her own husband had forged her signature to get the money. He then used that money to buy a condominium for his mistress, Tiffany Blake. In less than 45 minutes, her whole world was falling apart. Can a woman everyone dismissed as a simple homemaker really turn the tables and win? Stick around to see her get the sweetest revenge. The leak to the news was a serious threat to everything she had built. The big surprise she had spent so much time planning for tonight was about to be spoiled. The divorce papers were proof that Preston was already making his move to leave her with nothing at all. He had no idea about the massive fortune she secretly controlled. And the forged loan was a serious crime. If that information came out at the wrong time, it would ruin her plan before she was ready to make her move. Vivian sat on the bed in silence while Preston was in the shower. She could hear him singing a cheerful pop song about living your best life. His voice, so happy and confident, came right through the bathroom door. He was getting ready for what he believed would be the biggest night of his career. He was completely unaware that the woman sitting only 15 feet away was the real owner of the water he was washing with. She picked up her phone and called Benedict again. "You need to kill that story," she ordered. "I do not care what it takes. Promise the reporter an exclusive interview with me after the gala. Do whatever you have to, but that story cannot come out before I walk on that stage." Benedict's answer came instantly. "Consider it done." Vivian then asked, "And what about the fake signature?" She told him, "Put it inside Henderson's folder on page 4. She hung up the phone and then immediately called Ruth. Vivian said to her, "I need you at the gala tonight, and I need you to be there as more than just a friend. I need you inside that ballroom, sitting at a table near the back exit. If anything goes wrong, you are the only one I trust who is not on my payroll." Ruth answered without even a second of thought. "I will be there," she promised. Then she said, "And Viv, no matter what happens tonight, I just want you to know how unbelievably proud of you I am." At that moment, Preston came out of the bathroom in a cloud of steam, smelling like expensive cologne. He stood in front of the mirror, looking at himself as he straightened his tuxedo. He even practiced his smile, turning his head from side to side to see his best angle. He did not look at Vivian even once. "Vivian," he said, his eyes still on his own reflection, "where are my nice cufflinks?" "The black pair." "They are on your dresser, right where you left them," she answered. He grabbed them and then looked down at the expensive Rolex on his wrist. It was a gift from Vivian on their 5th wedding anniversary, but he told everyone that he had bought it for himself with a big work bonus. "I'm going to be home very late," he said. "Do not stay up waiting for me. and tell the housekeeper to dust the library the right way. I saw a fingerprint on my desk this morning." He took his coat and left the room. He did not say goodbye. He did not even glance her way. And he never once looked down at her stomach where his own daughter was growing inside her. The front door slammed with such power that the framed pictures on the hallway walls shook. The silence that followed felt thick and suffocating, like being trapped inside a ship as it sinks to the ocean floor. Vivian stood up. She untied the simple apron she wore and let it drop to the floor. She removed the plain band from her ponytail and her long, dark hair fell down her back. She walked to a locked door at the very end of the hall. Preston thought this room was just for storing old furniture. She entered a security code on a keypad, and the lock disengaged with a click. The room was not for storage. It was a high-tech command center. 3 large computer monitors glowed, displaying financial information that refreshed every second. A secure phone line sat on a massive desk. An entire wall was filled with meticulously organized files. And there, in the middle of the room on a dress form protected by a garment bag, was her dress. It was made of silk the color of a night sky. Thousands of tiny, crushed diamonds had been sewn into the material by hand, and they glittered in the dim light. The dress was created to perfectly flatter her pregnant shape. It draped around her like dark, swirling water, making her appear not just pregnant, but incredibly powerful. She looked like a gorgeous storm gathering on the horizon. Beside the dress was a jewelry case. Inside lay the Sinclair Blue, an incredible necklace with a huge sapphire surrounded by diamonds. It had been in her family for 3 generations. The necklace was worth a staggering $12 million. For years, her father had kept it hidden away in the cold, dark safety of a bank vault. "There will be a right time to wear this," he had once promised her. "Put it on the day you decide you will never let anyone make you feel powerless again." She gently ran her finger along the sapphire, its surface cool against her warm skin. "My powerless days are over," she whispered into the silence of the room. Just then, her phone lit up with a text from her grandmother, Gloria. It included a photograph of Gloria in her Ohio kitchen, smiling broadly as she brandished a heavy iron skillet like a weapon. The caption read, "Grandma is standing by, just in case your husband needs a little convincing." A real, genuine laugh escaped Vivian's lips for the first time that day. Her friend Ruth showed up at 4 o'clock carrying a garment bag, a makeup case borrowed from a friend in theater, and 2 bottles of fancy sparkling cider. "I wanted to bring champagne to properly toast this occasion," Ruth explained. "But with you expecting and me being the getaway driver, this felt more responsible. We can still make a toast to your husband's spectacular ruin." Ruth skillfully pinned Vivian's hair up, creating an elegant style that would perfectly display the Sinclair Blue necklace. The moment Vivian revealed the necklace, Ruth's mouth fell open. "Oh my goodness," she breathed. "Is that actually real?" Vivian gave a small smile. "It's called the Sinclair Blue. It has been in my family since 1942, Vivian said. Ruth just stared at the cascade of glittering diamonds. "For the past 5 years, I've been spotting you $20 for lunch," Ruth said, her voice filled with disbelief. $20, Vivian. I am officially sending you a bill for 5 years of unlicensed therapy, along with a down payment on a house at the beach. Vivian laughed again, but this laugh was different. It was deep and full of joy, like the voice of a long-lost friend she was finally hearing again. "Okay, but seriously," Ruth said. "Can I hold it for a second? I need to know what rich feels like." Vivian carefully handed the substantial piece of jewelry to her friend. Ruth held it up to the light, squeezed her eyes shut, and stood perfectly still for 3 seconds. Then she opened them and sighed. "Nope, it didn't work. I'm still in debt from school." After they were both dressed, Vivian made a video call to Gloria. She spun slowly for the camera, letting her grandmother admire the full effect. The dark blue dress flowed gracefully over her baby bump. Countless tiny diamonds shimmered like a constellation against the fabric, and the magnificent sapphire rested right at the base of her neck. For a moment, Gloria was too overwhelmed to say anything. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "Oh, my sweet girl. If your father could see you right now, he would be crying tears of pure pride." Vivian confessed, I am absolutely terrified, Grandma. Gloria's voice became strong and unwavering. Good. Fear is for the brave, her grandmother always said. Cowards are the ones who do not feel a thing. Now go put on those diamonds and show that man exactly what a fool he's been. She then added, You call me the minute it's done. I don't care what time it is. This old woman won't be sleeping a wink tonight. As Vivian got ready for the biggest night of her life, her husband, Preston, was across town at the Archdale Hotel in Manhattan, happily sealing his own fate. He arrived at 6:30 with Tiffany on his arm. She wore a loud red dress, a cheap copy of a designer piece he had charged to his company. The new necklace around her neck sparkled, bought with charity funds he had disguised as a business expense. Preston strode through the lobby like he owned the place. A tall security guard glanced down at a guest list on a tablet, found Preston's name, and paused. A strange look crossed the guard's face, a look that was almost like pity. Right this way, Mr. Carter, he said. Your table is up near the front, Preston smirked at Tiffany. See that? The front! That, my dear, is what real influence gets you. The ballroom was breathtaking, like something out of a fairy tale. Massive crystal chandeliers dripped from the high ceiling, and waiters in white gloves moved through the crowd like ghosts. The most powerful people in the city were all there, gathered in quiet clusters. Their laughter was soft, and their jewelry was brilliant. Preston scanned the room, desperate to be noticed by someone important. He saw Grant Holloway, an investor who had bested him on a deal a few months back. Grant was talking with a group of older gentlemen in tailored suits. Grant, what a pleasure to see you, Preston boomed, shouldering his way into their circle. Grant turned, his gaze narrowing as he took in Preston, and then Tiffany, who was as subtle as a fire engine. Preston, Grant said, his voice cold, I have to say I'm surprised to see you. This is an invitation-only event. I know people, Preston lied with a slick smile. This is Tiffany. Grant gave her a chilly nod, his eyes barely registering her existence. A pleasure. He turned back to the group. We were just discussing the Aurora Group. The rumor is the owner is finally going public tonight. Preston let out a harsh laugh. The Aurora Group? You can't be serious. It's probably some old guy in a nursing home hiding his money offshore. I heard the whole thing is just a scheme to wash dirty cash. One of the men in the group, who had silver hair, slowly turned and fixed his eyes on Preston. The man was Lord Rothschild, one of the 5 richest men in Europe. He was looking at Preston the way a person looks at an insect just before squashing it. I would choose your words very carefully, young man, Grant said, his tone perfectly level. The Aurora Group doesn't just own this hotel. There's a good chance they also own the bank that holds your company's loans. Preston waved a dismissive hand. I know how business works. I can spot a fake company a mile away. Aurora has no face, no one in charge, which means it has no real power. Grant just smiled and took a slow sip of his drink. If you say so, Preston. By the way, where's your lovely wife this evening? Vivian, wasn't it? Preston rolled his eyes dramatically. Oh, Vivian is at home. She's not built for this world. She's a sweet woman, but very simple. Her big night out involves a cheap bottle of wine from a grocery store. You know the type. Beside him, Tiffany giggled. She sounds like a cute little country mouse. Exactly, Preston agreed, grabbing a fresh glass of champagne. A mouse. But in my world, you need a lioness. He pulled Tiffany closer, pleased with his own cleverness. He was completely unaware that the little mouse he had dismissed was on her way to the hotel, and she was about to eat him for lunch. At precisely 8 o'clock, the lights in the grand ballroom dimmed. The low hum of 500 conversations died instantly, as if someone had blown out a candle. A single spotlight hit the massive staircase at the far end of the room. The marble steps seemed to glow, forming a path to the heavens, or for some, a path in the opposite direction. The evening's host, a famous actor with a voice like smooth velvet, stepped to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 50th annual Diamond Gala. Tonight is a historic evening. For decades, the Aurora Group has quietly supported hospitals, charities, and the arts from behind the scenes. But tonight, the chairwoman has decided to step into the light. Preston gave Tiffany a nudge. Get ready for some old woman. I will bet you $10. The host's voice filled the silent hall. Please join me in welcoming the owner and chairwoman of the Aurora Group, Madame Vivian Sinclair. The champagne flute slipped from Preston's fingers and shattered on the floor. The sound was lost in a single, stunned gasp that swept through the entire room. Sinclair. It was Vivian's name before she had taken his, and that was simply not possible. Her father had only been a mechanic. Preston had actually met the man before he passed away. He could still picture the dark grease that was permanently stuck under the man's fingernails. He remembered eating barbecue in the man's tiny backyard. The large double doors at the very top of the grand staircase swung open, and Vivian was standing there. She stood at the highest point of the stairs wearing a gown the color of the sky at midnight. The fabric of the dress flowed gently over her pregnant belly like a soft waterfall in the twilight. Thousands of tiny crushed diamonds had been sewn into the material, and they caught the spotlight and broke it into a million shining pieces. She looked as if she were glowing with a light from another world. The Sinclair blue sapphire was around her neck, a $12 million jewel that seemed to beat with its own internal life. Her dark hair was styled in an elegant way that showed off the beautiful curve of her neck. Even at 7 months pregnant, she was the most powerful presence in the entire room. She started to walk down the stairs. The sound of her heels clicking on the marble was steady and confident with every single step she took. She moved with the self-assurance of a woman who owned the very ground she walked on, which, in this case, was entirely true. The crowd parted for her. 500 of New York City's richest and most powerful people stepped out of her way as if she were Moses parting the Red Sea. Vivian walked straight through them, her eyes fixed directly ahead. Her eyes were fixed on only one man, Preston. He was stuck at his table, completely frozen with his mouth hanging open. A storm of different emotions crossed his face, one after another. His girlfriend Tiffany finally understood something was wrong and grabbed his arm in a panic. She whispered, "Why does that woman look just like your wife, but dressed like a famous movie star?" Nearby, Grant Holloway overheard her question, and a small, satisfied smile touched his lips. He leaned in and said, "I believe, Preston, that is the quiet little mouse you claim to have left at home." Vivian reached the bottom of the grand staircase and stopped about 10 feet away from Preston. 4 security guards formed a protective wall around her. To her right stood Benedict Ashford, looking perfect in a dark gray suit. On her left was Marcus Henderson, the financial investigator, holding a leather folder that looked like it held a death sentence. Vivian's eyes locked with Preston's, and a slow, cold smile spread across her lips. It had no warmth and offered no forgiveness. It was the smile of a woman who would never be taken for granted again. Someone handed her a microphone, and her strong, clear voice filled the huge ballroom. "Hello, everyone. I am sorry for being late," she continued. "I had to take out some trash before I could come here." Her eyes never left Preston. Then she turned her attention to Lord Rothschild. "Lord Rothschild, I want to apologize for any confusion about the Shanghai deal. Benedict has told me that all the paperwork is now correct." The old lord bowed his head with respect. "Please do not worry about it, Madame Sinclair. Your plan for the Asian market is absolutely brilliant. It is our honor to follow your direction." Preston could only stare in total shock. One of the most powerful men in Europe was bowing to the woman he thought was just his quiet, simple wife. Something inside him started to break. Vivian turned back to the microphone. Her face was calm, but her friend Ruth, watching from the back, saw that her hands were shaking just a little. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vivian began, "for the last 5 years I have been doing a kind of social experiment. I wanted to see if a man could love a woman for who she truly is, not for what she owns. So I hid my real identity. I acted like a normal wife and mother. I let my husband take control of everything." She pushed a button. A company chart appeared on the giant screen behind her. The Aurora Group was at the very top. Below it was a complicated web of smaller, fake companies. And at the very bottom, attached like a leech, was Carter Ventures. My husband, Preston, thought he was a brilliant businessman who built his company all by himself. But the truth is, every single dollar his company ever made came from me. I moved all the money through these fake companies. I was his only investor. I was his only customer. I was his only source of cash. Preston shot up from his chair. That is a lie. I made a deal in Tokyo last month. That was $2 million from real clients. Vivian calmly pushed the button again. A bank statement appeared on the huge screen. It showed the Tokyo deal was paid for by a company called Orion Acquisitions, which belonged to her. You were in a meeting with my own lawyers, Preston. I hired actors to sit at the table with you. You were so busy looking at your expensive watch that you did not even notice they could not speak a single word of English. The picture on the screen changed again. It showed hotel receipts from the St. Regis Hotel for every Tuesday afternoon. It showed a bill for a Cartier necklace, hidden as an office expense for computer parts. Then, a huge picture of Preston and Tiffany at Disney World filled the screen. They were both wearing Mickey Mouse ears. He had told her that trip was a business meeting in Chicago. Vivian left the Disney World photo on the screen for everyone to see. A wave of laughter rolled through the ballroom, but it was a cold and cruel sound. It was the sound of high society turning its back on one of its own. Henderson stepped forward, holding a stack of forged papers. "And this," Henderson announced to the crowd, "is a loan for $500,000 against their house, which he took out just yesterday. He forged her signature," Henderson explained. "The money was used to buy a condominium in Stamford, Connecticut, which is now in the name of Miss Tiffany Blake." Henderson then stared directly at Tiffany. "That necklace you are wearing, Miss Blake? It was bought with a company credit card. That card was for a charity that feeds orphans in Sudan. You are wearing the food money for an entire village." Tiffany's hands flew to the expensive jewelry. Her fingers fumbled with the clasp as she desperately tried to rip it off her neck. "Get it off me! Take it off!" "He told me he was rich. He swore he made his own money." "Oh, he is a self-made man," Vivian said, her voice like ice. "He made himself into a criminal." For the final, crushing blow, Henderson held up an old, yellowed birth certificate. "Ladies and gentlemen, the man you know as Preston Carter was born Preston Allen Mallory in Trenton, New Jersey. He legally changed his name 4 years ago. Before that, he was a junior manager at a car rental agency. He was fired for renting cars to himself for his weekend trips. The humiliation was absolute. The man with the borrowed clothes, the borrowed name, and the borrowed life had nowhere left to hide." From the side doors, federal agents began to quietly enter the ballroom. "Preston Allen Mallory," the lead agent said in a loud, firm voice, "you are under arrest for multiple charges of fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement." As they put handcuffs on him, Preston screamed across the room, "I loved you, Vivian. In my own strange way, I really did love you." Vivian did not yell back. She simply reached up and unfastened the clasp of the magnificent Sinclair blue diamond around her neck. She held the giant sapphire up high so everyone could see it sparkle. "You did not love me, Preston. You loved the perfect version of yourself that you saw in my money, but that mirror is now completely shattered." The agents dragged him toward the exit. The big wooden doors slammed shut and his desperate voice was gone. The entire room exploded with applause. Vivian raised a simple glass of water. "To the future, may it be honest, may it be bright, and may it be ours." For the next 48 hours, Vivian Sinclair was the most talked about woman in the entire country. The video from the charity event spread across the internet like a wildfire. Every news channel covered the story. Billionaire wife exposes fake husband at gala. The clips of Preston's face falling apart as he learned his whole life was a lie were watched 200 million times in only 2 days. The picture of him in the Mickey Mouse ears became a very popular internet meme. People even started to sell t-shirts with his face on them. Someone turned Henderson's financial takedown into a rap song that went to the top of the comedy music charts. Vivian was finally back in her house in Greenwich. She sat on her sofa with her feet up. She had an ice pack on her swollen ankles and was watching the news with Ruth. For the first time in 5 very long years, the house felt peaceful and quiet. It was not the tense silence of things not being said. It was the calm quiet of real freedom. Ruth handed her a warm cup of herbal tea. "You did it, Viv. It is all finished. You really did it." Vivian gently put a hand on her pregnant belly. The baby kicked. a strong and solid kick as if it was cheering for her too. "Yes," she whispered. "I guess I did." Just then, Ruth's phone made a sound. She looked down at the screen and her warm smile disappeared. All the color left her face. Ruth's voice came through the phone in a frantic whisper. "Viv, you have to see this." She sent a video that was secretly recorded inside the county jail and was already spreading like wildfire. The footage showed Tiffany Blake in a bright orange jumpsuit, her face a complete mess of runny, tear-stained mascara. Another inmate was secretly filming her. I could not tell if her tears were real, but it made no difference. The damage was instant and devastating. "She destroyed my life," Tiffany sobbed at the hidden camera. "I am pregnant and I have nobody. Preston told me she was a monster. He said they were divorcing and even showed me the legal papers. Now I am stuck in here, all because a billionaire wanted to teach him a lesson." Her voice cracked with phony grief. "She is no hero. She is just a rich woman who spent 5 years playing with our lives. She could have walked away any time, but she stayed, watching us all suffer just so she could have this huge public drama. What about my baby? Does my child not deserve a chance to live?" In just 6 hours, the video went viral, racking up 14 million views. The entire public narrative flipped completely. In the blink of an eye, the woman everyone had been rooting for was now the villain. The internet headlines changed with shocking speed. "Billionaire's revenge or billionaire's cruelty?" one asked. Another one announced, "Pregnant mistress claims she was the true victim." A third headline wondered aloud, "Did Vivian Sinclair go too far?" Soon the television talk shows were dissecting my every move. One analyst asked, "This woman is worth $4 billion. She bankrolled his entire fake life. How can we be certain she was not the one controlling everything from the start?" A well-known columnist published a piece titled, "The Problem with Justice for the Rich." The article argued that I had treated real human beings like pieces in a chess game for my own sick entertainment. The comments online were unbelievably cruel. One person wrote, "She could have just divorced him. Instead, she chose to humiliate him in front of 500 guests. That is not justice. That is a flagrant abuse of power." But then I saw the one comment that hurt the most. What kind of mother would use her own pregnancy as a weapon in a public feud? I sat on the edge of my bed, one hand on my stomach, as I scrolled through the hateful words. The perfect world I had fought so hard to win back was starting to crumble all over again. Finally, Ruth had to gently take the phone from my hands. "Viv, you have to stop reading these. These people do not know you. They have no clue what that man made you suffer." "But they are not entirely wrong, Ruth," I said. My voice a faint whisper, quieter than it ever was when Preston used to scream at me. "I did plan it all. I could have left 5 years ago. What kind of person stays in a miserable situation just to build a better trap?" "Someone who was in love," Ruth replied softly. "Someone who clung to the hope that he could change and become a good person. That is not a weakness, Vivian. That is what being human is all about." A little while later, Gloria called from Ohio, and her voice was like a splash of cold, refreshing water. "Honey, since when have we ever cared what a mob of strangers on the internet thinks about us? You know what is in your heart. God knows what is in your heart. And that tiny baby inside of you knows your heart. Everybody else can go jump in a lake." Then she spoke the words I desperately needed to hear. "Let me tell you something I learned the hard way. While you are fighting a monster, the whole world cheers for you. But the moment you win, they start whispering that you might have fought a little too dirty. Do not you dare apologize for surviving. They have been telling women to say sorry for their own strength since the beginning of time. That nonsense stops with you." I wiped the tears from my cheeks. "Okay, Grandma." But the storm of bad publicity was not my most serious problem. The real danger came 30 minutes later, with a phone call from Benedict. He used a grave tone I had only ever heard him use in a genuine crisis. "Madam, I need you to please sit down. Preston's new lawyer, a man named Harlan Drake, just filed 3 emergency motions. First, he is accusing you of entrapment. His first move is to argue that you knowingly funded Preston's criminal enterprise simply to set him up. If he succeeds, That could make you his legal accomplice. Second, he is suing for custody of your unborn child. Preston is asking for sole custody, arguing that you are mentally unstable and used your pregnancy to publicly humiliate him. Third, he is filing a countersuit against you for $50 million. His claim is that you trapped him in marriage by hiding who you really were. All the warmth vanished from Vivian's body, leaving her cold and numb. He is trying to take my Eleanor. A family court has set a temporary hearing for next week. If Drake can convince the judge you planned the crimes, Preston's federal charges might be reduced. But more importantly, he could build a case to take away your child. The room started to spin. Vivian grabbed the edge of the bed just to stay upright. Deep inside her, the baby kicked hard and sudden, as if she could feel the wave of fear washing over her mother. He cannot have my daughter, Benedict. He cannot. And he will not, Benedict vowed, his voice firm and unshakable. But we must be prepared. This is no longer about settling a score, madam. This is about survival. Over the next 3 days, Vivian retreated into what Ruth would later call the dark place. She barely touched her food. Sleep never came. She would just sit for hours in the nursery, the special room she had quietly been preparing for months. The walls were painted a gentle yellow, the crib was a bright, clean white, and a stuffed elephant rested in the corner. She had picked it up unexpectedly at a local farmer's market. It made her think of a similar toy her own father gave her when she was a little girl. She would rock back and forth in the chair, holding her belly and whispering to her daughter, "My only job was to keep you safe. I thought I was being clever. But now he might take you from me, all because I was too proud to just walk away. I am so sorry, my sweet girl. I am so, so sorry." Ruth discovered her there on the third morning. She did not say a word at first, just sat down on the floor, her back against the crib, sharing the suffocating silence. After what felt like an eternity, she spoke a single word. "Stop." Vivian raised her head, her eyes completely hollow. "Stop it right now," Ruth said with sudden force. "You will not lose this baby. Not while I am here, not while Gloria is here, and certainly not while Benedict Ashford and his very proper, very British self are here. That is not going to happen. So stop mourning for a loss that has not happened and start fighting. What proof do we have on our side?" Vivian just stared at her friend. Then, a tiny spark ignited deep within her eyes. This was not the icy, strategic look she wore at the gala. This was something different, something warmer and far more dangerous. It was the fire of a mother protecting her cub. She picked up the secure phone and called Benedict. "I need an emergency meeting, the entire team, in 1 hour." They all gathered on a secure video conference. Benedict joined from London. Henderson was in his simple office in Midtown. Vivian's lawyers were in their meeting room, and with them was Detective Sarah Crawford. From the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, she had been secretly collaborating with Vivian on this case for the last 18 months. "The claim that I entrapped him," Vivian began, her voice now ringing with new strength. "That entire argument disappears if we can show I was working with law enforcement from the very start. Benedict, I want the full email chain with the FBI organized and filed with the court immediately. I want every single message, every attachment, every single timestamp." Benedict nodded. "It is already in process, madam. We have 147 documented communications with the Bureau, dating back a year and a half. You were not helping him break the law. You were building a federal case with their guidance." Detective Crawford then spoke. "I will confirm that in a sworn statement. Mrs. Carter, or rather Mrs. Sinclair, was a confidential informant. She came to us 18 months ago with evidence of financial misconduct inside her husband's company. Our department advised her to keep observing him as we built our legal strategy. Every move she made was an authorized and essential element of our investigation." Vivian immediately moved on to the second point. "All right, what about the custody fight? What do we need to do to make sure we win?" Her lawyer answered, "We need a powerful character witness. We need someone to testify about your fitness as a mother and to tell the judge why hiding your identity was necessary. We need a person the court will find absolutely credible." Vivian thought about it for a second. And then, for the first time in 3 miserable days, A slow, certain smile spread across her face. "Buy my grandmother a plane ticket," she said. The hearing was held the next Thursday at a family courthouse in Stamford, Connecticut. The courtroom was packed. Reporters crowded the hallway right outside the doors. Preston appeared on a large screen from jail, looking small and pathetic in his tan jumpsuit, as his lawyer, Harlan Drake, spoke for him. Vivian had to admit Drake was talented. He was a distinguished man with silver hair who spoke in a calm, reasonable voice that made his unbelievable accusations sound almost logical. "Your Honor," Drake said, "even if we are to believe Mrs. Carter was an informant for the government, that does not change the fundamental issue we are here to decide today. She maintained a false identity for the entire duration of her marriage. She actively deceived her husband about her real self. This points to a profound level of psychological manipulation. A woman who can carry on such a deception for 5 years is not a fit parent." Vivian's lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Webb, stood up. "Your Honor, we would like to call a character witness, Gloria Sinclair, who is the petitioner's grandmother." Gloria entered the courtroom with the quiet confidence of a woman who had seen it all. She was 78 years old and used a simple cane for support. She wore a lovely floral dress and her best hat for Sunday service. She looked exactly like the ideal grandmother from an old American painting, the kind of person everyone in the room instantly trusted. She swore the oath and took a seat in the witness chair, looking completely at ease in a setting that would terrify most people. Drake, the other lawyer, approached her. "Mrs. Sinclair, is it not true that your granddaughter lied about her wealth to her husband for their entire marriage?" Gloria gave him a look filled with gentle disappointment, the kind you might give a child who just tracked mud across a newly mopped kitchen floor. "Young man," she began, "my granddaughter watched her first fiancé steal $2 million from her before he ran off to Costa Rica. She saw every man she dated become obsessed with her money the moment they found out she was wealthy. One of those men stole from her. Another sold details of her private life to a gossip magazine. A third man proposed after only 2 weeks and was already asking about a joint bank account before she even had a ring on her finger." Gloria leaned forward and her voice became sharp and clear. "So yes, she hid who she was. She did it hoping to find one man, just one, who would love her for the person she was inside, not for the numbers in her bank account." "That is not a lie, counselor. That is called protecting yourself. And if you cannot tell the difference, then I feel very sorry for your wife." A quiet murmur went through the courtroom. The judge, a woman in her mid-50s named Judge Harrison, pressed her lips together, trying hard not to smile. Drake tried to object. "But the length of time, Mrs. Sinclair. 5 years of deception." Gloria simply tilted her head. 5 years of cooking that man his dinner, 5 years of washing his laundry, 5 years of him calling her dumb and unattractive while she was pregnant with his child. 5 years of watching him use her own money to spoil another woman? And you have the audacity to lecture me about honesty? Counselor, my granddaughter was not the one telling lies in this marriage. She was the one who was fooled by the man she thought she loved. The judge announced her ruling 40 minutes later. The request for custody is denied. This court finds zero evidence that Mrs. Sinclair Carter is an unfit mother. The countersuit is dismissed entirely. The claim that she entrapped him is baseless, especially given the documented evidence of his cooperation with federal authorities. Furthermore, the court would like to note that the man in question, Mr. Mallory, is currently facing federal charges that include forging his wife's signature on a loan. This court finds his story of being a victim completely unbelievable. A few moments later in the hallway, Vivian hugged Ruth so tightly they almost fell over. Gloria patted her on the back and said, "All right now, can we please get some lunch? Standing up for what is right gives a person a powerful appetite." That night, Vivian slept for a full 12 hours without waking up even once. It was the most peaceful rest she had known in many, many years. She dreamed about her father. He was in his workshop, leaning over an engine, when he looked up and gave her a warm smile. "You did a wonderful job, Vivi. Now go get some real rest." For the first time in 5 very long years, she woke up feeling like a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The threat to her child was finally over. The government had a solid, undeniable case against Preston. The news reports were starting to change as more details of his cruel behavior came to light. Ruth was staying the night. Gloria had driven all the way from Ohio and was now settled in the guest room. She had placed her cast iron skillet on the nightstand, saying, "You can just never be too careful." By 10 o'clock that evening, the house was quiet and calm. Ruth was sound asleep in her room down the hall. Gloria was snoring gently in the room directly across from hers. Vivian sat up in bed with a hand on her stomach, reading a book about sleep training for newborns. The whole idea felt wonderfully hopeful, especially since she had not slept properly since the 1990s. At 3 in the morning, a noise jolted her awake. It was a faint sound, like a door closing somewhere on the first floor. Then she heard the soft scuff of shoes on the hardwood floor. After that came the very distinct creak of the third step on the staircase, the one she kept forgetting to get fixed. There was an intruder in her house. Vivian's hand shot out to grab her phone from the nightstand. Her other hand moved to protect her belly. The baby shifted inside her, then became very still, as if it were listening too. She dialed the number for the home security company. The call connected, but she heard no ringing. The line was completely dead. It had been cut. Whoever was in her house had severed the phone lines. She grabbed the special, secure phone and quickly typed a message to Ruth. "Someone is in the house. Call 911. Do not leave your room." And that is when she heard his voice. Vivian. It was without a doubt Preston. She would know that voice anywhere, even in a storm. But it sounded different now. It was not the smooth, confident voice she remembered. This voice was raspy, broken, and completely unhinged. She could hear him moving around downstairs, pacing through the living room, and then into the kitchen. Then his footsteps stopped. She heard the beeps of the keypad for the hidden room. Someone typed in the wrong code, then another. This was followed by the heavy thud of a body throwing itself against the door, a shoulder hitting it with the full force of a desperate man. The door splintered and burst open with a crash. Vivian heard him step into the room. She could picture the exact moment he saw the monitors, the papers, the entire wall covered with evidence. She heard a strange sound that was half a laugh and half a sob. Then, she heard his footsteps on the stairs. They were slow and heavy, and they were coming closer. He appeared in the doorway of her bedroom. His eyes were wild, and his hair was a complete mess. He smelled like bourbon. He was wearing a wrinkled shirt and jeans, probably the same clothes he had worn in court. His lawyer must have pulled some strings to get him released on bail. 5 years, Preston said, his voice shaking. For 5 years, you watched me like I was some kind of lab rat in a cage. You knew everything. You knew about every meeting, every business trip, every single lie. You just sat there in your cute little apron, and you watched me. Preston, you need to leave right now. You are violating the terms of your bail. The police have been called, and they are on their way. You are the one who did this, he snarled. His hands were clenched into tight white fists. I was a good man before I met you. You made me into this monster, you dangled all that money in my face, and then you judged me for wanting it. This is all your fault, Vivian. Every single bit of it. He took one step into the room. Vivian scrambled back against the headboard, her hand pressed against her stomach. Eleanor gave a short, sharp kick, as if she was trying to fight the danger herself. I am giving you one chance, Preston. Turn around and walk out that door. Go call your lawyer. This does not have to get any worse. Worse? Preston let out a cold, hollow laugh. How could it possibly get any worse? You have ruined my reputation. You have taken my company. You have stolen my freedom. You have made me a joke to the entire world. What else is there for me to lose? From the hallway, a new voice cut through the tension, sharp and clear. Your dignity, son. But you lost that a very, very long time ago. Gloria Sinclair was standing in the doorway. She was a 78-year-old woman, standing only 5 feet 2 inches tall, and she wore a simple bathrobe with pink flowers on it. In her right hand, she held a 12-inch cast-iron skillet at shoulder height. She held it with the easy confidence of a woman who had been handling heavy cookware since before Preston was even born. I am 78 years old, Gloria declared as she stepped into the bedroom. I have buried 2 husbands. I lived through the Jim Crow South. I recovered from a total hip replacement. I survived the pain of watching my own son die in my arms. Do you really think for one single second that I am scared of you?" Preston just stared at the small, elderly woman holding the frying pan. For a moment, the rage in his eyes was replaced by something else, maybe confusion, or even a flicker of shame. "Sit down," Gloria commanded. Preston did not sit, but he did take a step backward, and that was all the time she needed. Suddenly, Ruth was there behind Gloria, holding a phone to her ear. "Preston, I am on the line with 911 right now. The police will be here in 4 minutes. That gives you exactly 240 seconds to think about adding breaking and entering to your list of federal charges." Those 4 minutes felt like an eternity. Preston stood frozen in the hallway, his breathing loud and uneven. He kept opening and closing his fists as he stared at Vivian through the open bedroom door. She held his gaze without looking away, her hand resting on her stomach, determined not to let him see her fear. The first thing they heard was the wail of sirens, followed quickly by the sight of flashing lights. Red and blue pulsed through the windows like a frantic heartbeat. 2 police officers came through the front door, with 2 more right behind them. They found Preston standing in the same spot in the hallway where he had been when Gloria confronted him. He put up no fight. It was as if all the aggression had drained out of him, leaving behind an empty and broken man. As the officers put him in handcuffs and led him away, he twisted his head to give her one last glare. "This is not over, Vivian. I will take everything from you. I will even take our child. You will never be free of me." The front door slammed shut. The sirens faded into the distance, and a deep silence finally settled over the house. Vivian's resolve finally broke. She collapsed against the headboard, curling into a tight ball on the mattress. She pulled her knees toward her chest, her round belly resting softly on her thighs. A powerful tremor ran through her entire body. Her friend Ruth gently draped a warm blanket over her shoulders. Her grandmother Gloria sat on the bed's edge and placed a comforting hand on Vivian's knee. "It is all finished now, my child. He is out of your life. He can never harm you again." Vivian's reply was barely audible, just a faint whisper. "But what if it was my fault? What if I was the one who made him that way?" Gloria waited a moment, letting the painful question fill the space between them. She squeezed Vivian's knee gently, her voice full of a lifetime of wisdom. "Now you listen to me, Vivian Marie. A good woman cannot make a man cruel. A cruel man simply hides his true nature until he feels he is safe enough to show it. You did not create that monster, my dear girl. You just gave him a very comfortable place to hide for a little while." This is the story of how Vivian Sinclair won back her life from the man who tried to destroy her, and how she built a brand new world from the ruins. If you believe in the strength it takes to start over, please like this video to help it reach others who need this message. And tell us in the comments, do you think public revenge is ever justified, or is it always better to quietly walk away? We are very curious to read what you think. When Vivian's daughter was finally born, even the ever-proper Benedict was moved to tears. He was watching on a video call from London, where it was 2 in the morning. He had to remove his glasses and gently pat his eyes with a crisp handkerchief. "She is absolutely perfect, madam," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A truly perfect child." "Well, of course she is," Gloria sniffed, her own eyes glistening with joyful tears. She held the newborn baby with the effortless grace that comes from a lifetime of rocking infants to sleep. She is a Sinclair, after all. The weeks that came after were the most tranquil Vivian had ever known. She had moved into Gloria's home in Dayton, the very same house her own father had grown up in. She could imagine her dad, Henry, sitting on that porch during summer evenings carving little wooden animals for her. The dogwood trees were full of white blossoms, and the air smelled of freshly cut grass and second chances. Her daughter Eleanor slept peacefully in a bassinet right next to Vivian's bed. She made the soft, happy noises of a baby who feels completely safe and deeply loved. It is a sound so pure, it can make a woman who has seen the worst of the world believe that everything might just be all right. One Saturday in May, Ruth drove down for a visit. She came with a big pack of diapers, a hot, home-cooked casserole, and a bottle of sparkling apple cider. "We have a new life to celebrate," she announced, with a huge smile. The two friends made themselves comfortable on Gloria's welcoming front porch. For 5 agonizing years, Preston made Vivian believe she was completely worthless. He was a master of cruel mind games. The neighbors could hear his angry shouts through the thin walls. The waitresses at the local diner saw her try to hide her swollen, tear-filled eyes every morning. He carefully destroyed her confidence piece by piece until there was almost nothing left. She had become someone who would accept terrible treatment from a man who saw her as his property. But he made one critical mistake. He never managed to extinguish the tiny, final spark of her inner strength. How does a woman who has been so completely broken turn the tables on a man like that? Her story of justice will truly surprise you. Now that man was finally gone. Last month, a judge had sentenced him to 8 years in a federal prison, and for the first time in a long time, Vivian could breathe. Eleanor slept soundly on her mother's chest, her little hand wrapped around a piece of Vivian's hair. The afternoon sun filled the room with a warm, golden glow, making the world feel gentle and safe. "All right," Ruth said, pouring cider into 2 different glasses she found in Gloria's kitchen. "You have to tell me everything. I want to hear all the news." Vivian took a quiet sip before she began to speak. Vivian's plan to get justice was simple, but it was also the bravest thing she had ever done. She organized a huge charity gala, a fancy event attended by the city's most important people. For months, she had played one perfect moment over and over in her mind. She imagined the deep satisfaction of seeing Preston's carefully built reputation crumble in front of everyone, and when the night finally arrived, it was even better than she had imagined. She watched the polite, charming mask he always hid behind finally crack and fall away. She saw the absolute shock on the guests' faces as they finally saw the monster she had been living with. In that single moment, the false story he told the world collapsed, and the truth came rushing out. After that night, there was nowhere left for him to hide. His lawyers tried to make a deal, but the judge offered no sympathy. Preston received a sentence that offered no possibility of parole for 5 years. An earlier bail violation added another 18 months to his time. As for their company, Carter Ventures was completely taken apart. Every last asset was taken over by Vivian's own company, Aurora. Her loyal advisor, Benedict, managed the entire transfer. The Carter name was scrubbed from every building and every document as if it had never existed. A while later, Ruth mentioned that Tiffany, the other woman, had a baby boy named James. She had accepted a deal for 6 months of probation and 200 hours of community service. "How do you feel about that?" Ruth asked carefully. Vivian watched a small bird hop across the grass. After a long silence, she answered, "I set up an anonymous trust fund for the baby." Ruth was completely speechless. Vivian then said, "That little boy didn't choose his parents, Ruth. He deserves a good start, not a life ruined by their terrible decisions." But Vivian learned a surprising lesson about justice. It does not give you the feeling you expect. The excitement from her public victory faded in just a few hours. It was replaced by a deep tiredness and the enormous task of starting her life over. What truly healed her was much quieter than a public showdown. It was the simple peace of sitting on a porch in Ohio with her best friend, her grandmother, and her new baby. It was hearing the birds sing and feeling the sun's warmth, knowing she was safe and loved by the people who really mattered. 6 months later, Vivian stood on a small stage at a community center in Dayton. The room was filled with women who were survivors, just like her. She looked out at their faces and took a slow, calming breath. "I am not standing here today as a successful business owner," she began. "I am here as a woman who stayed in a harmful relationship for far too long." She confessed to them that even with all her money and connections, choosing to leave was the most difficult thing she had ever done. "And that is why I created this foundation," she announced. Her foundation was designed to provide free legal help, safe housing, job training, and even childcare. It was made to make sure that when a woman made the brave choice to leave, she had a safe future to walk into. As she stepped down from the stage, her daughter Eleanor reached for her with chubby little arms. Vivian lifted her into a warm embrace. Her grandmother Gloria came toward them in her wheelchair. "My dear, sweet girl," Gloria said, her voice full of emotion. "Your father would have been so incredibly proud of the person you have become." At that moment, Vivian's phone buzzed with a message from Benedict in London. It read, "The Paris business deal is finalized. The board sends their congratulations. On another note, your grandmother called me to request a shipment of British tea biscuits, the chocolate ones. Should I approve this purchase?" Vivian smiled and typed back, "Approve it immediately. Do not keep her waiting. She is surprisingly accurate with a skillet." She walked out into the bright October sun with Eleanor in her arms and her family by her side. She had been lost for a very long time, but she had finally found her way back to herself. She was not a victim, and she was not a woman looking for revenge. She was a mother. She was a daughter. And she was a friend. She was a woman who finally knew her own worth, and she was 100% correct. Thank you for joining us for our story. We hope it is a powerful reminder that every person deserves to be treated with kindness and dignity. We look forward to seeing you again for our next one.